What's the opposite of love? Well, if you answer that hate, it's understandable. Those are the opposites that we're taught when we're young. But I'm here to tell you that the opposite of love is not hate. And in fact, whether we talk about this on an internal level or in the microcosm of a family and relationships, a marriage, a significant other, or we look at it on the macrocosm of global geopolitics, the opposite of love we see over and over, both neurologically and among people groups, is not hate, but it is fear. In fact, it's so consistent that once we introduce fear into the brain, people are no longer able to access the parts of their brain that do things like communicate effectively and empathize. We even get less skilled at reading facial expressions as soon as fear is introduced into the picture. Now, if you think about this from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's pretty brilliant. Our brain knows that fear is going to keep us alive, and therefore fear needs to trump all other experiences in our brain and body, right? Like joy or peace or empathy or connection. Those of us who have a quick response to fear, are going to be able to survive and pass on our genes, and we've inherited that. So it makes sense when you're looking at it from a survival standpoint. But what becomes incredibly difficult is that as soon as we introduce fear into the equation, we've now compromised our ability to make connections with other people. I want to talk about this in two ways today. The first one is considering it on a personal level in interpersonal relationships. Most all of the time when I see families and couples in my office and there is a situation of high conflict that they can't get past, if we dig deep enough, underneath the years of stories, the anger, the hurts, that resistance is ultimately seated somewhere in fear. There's some kind of fear that's playing a role when people are trying to connect and they just can't. Whether that's fear of vulnerability, fear of a repeat, fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of violence, fear of aggression. Sometimes these fears are legitimate. But until we can name them out loud, we really don't stand a chance at doing much with them, right? We can't evaluate them if we're not sure that they're there. So on a personal level, if you find yourself regularly struggling to connect with someone or some group of people like your family members and you really want to, check if fear might be lurking somewhere in there. Because neurologically, fear or a fight and flight response is going to trump any ability to connect and empathize. And P.S., if you're somebody who was raised in a household where fear was very present, trauma or chaos or abuse, drug abuse, or perhaps mental illness that was severe, if you were raised in that household, then fear almost always gets interwoven into vulnerability, as I've talked about in other videos, because it doesn't feel safe. So sometimes the fear is not specifically about that person, but the fear can be about a more general sense of a lack of safety for one reason or another. That was the first thing. But the second thing I want to talk about is how that works out among people groups. I'm going to take a deep breath here and just give you the knowledge I have and let you apply it in your life where you see it present. But here's what I know for sure. If I run media and I want to get eyes on what I'm posting, it's not sex, although that sells, and it's not rage, although that sells too. The best thing I can sell is fear. Fear sells. Fear sells to all of us because we all have something that we fear. But the best fear that sells is the fear of another people group. If you want to create conflict between people, don't sell hate, you sell fear. Because while people will be angered and enraged if they feel hate, they won't feel retaliatory. They won't be disconnected from love unless fear has been introduced. Fear sells. But also fear damages our ability to connect to those around us. What I want to do is open your eyes, because right now I know you're hearing this and you're thinking of a particular group of people who's just overwhelmed with fear, right? But I want you to take it back to yourself for a moment. I want you to look at the way you feel about that people group, for instance, or the things that you fear, because we all do. All of us. Remember, fear can be our friend. Fear is present for all of us. But when you ask yourself what you fear, and you can have an honest conversation with yourself about that fear, then you can finally begin to look at the places where you may have blind spots in regards to empathy, where you may be disconnected from love. So, as a final thought, whether it's in your personal relationships or when you look at the larger community around you, when you watch politics or media or geopolitical events, or just in your own interpersonal experiences in the office or in your home, take a look at what you fear. And anytime you're seeing a lack of love, ask the question, where's the fear here? And find that it's incredibly informative. What we love and what we fear are huge motivators. And since they're opposites, they get in the way of each other. If you want more love in your life, take a look at your fear.